Hi, I'm Amy Brabson, and welcome to the UUSC 80th Anniversary Gala. The UUSC celebrates 80 years of fighting internationally for human rights and social justice. Welcome again to this virtual celebration.
Would seem so strange. It dishonors those who go before us. So lift me up to the light of change. Yes, I am open and I am willing, for to be hopeless would seem so strange. It dishonors those who go before us. So lift me up to the light of change.
Thank you, Amy. That was beautiful. Welcome, everyone. I'm Reverend Mary Catherine Moore, President and CEO of the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. I am very happy to welcome you to our virtual gala, celebrating UUSC's 80th anniversary. We're glad to have the opportunity this evening to hear from Ambassador Samantha Power, and I also look forward to sharing greetings from some of UUSC's partners and some special guests. Tonight, we honor the brave legacy of our founders and countless grassroots leaders, organizers, and activists who year after year partner for human rights around the world. We honor this brave legacy tonight, and even more important, we look together with hope and commitment to a bold vision for our future, where the dignity and power of all people are affirmed. Today, UUSC's work addresses forced displacement caused by violence, economic oppression, and climate change, the criminalization of people based on their identity, and the unjust impacts of natural and human-created disasters. These forces of oppression intersect and cause layers and layers of injustice. In partnership with grassroots organizations, UUSC provides emergency relief in times of disaster, supports the rights of migrants, and works with indigenous communities fighting for their self-determination in the face of the destruction of their lands. Through our College of Social Justice and Love Resists, we partner with other Unitarian Universalists to create change and build beloved community. Our partners are small, problem-solving, innovative, cooperative organizations, most often led by people from the communities they are serving. Though UUSC is small in the world of international human rights, our impact is significant because we put our trust and our resources in partners who are boldly leading us all toward collective liberation. UUSC is fortunate to have deep faith and trust from our membership. Just as the trust of our partners is essential for our work, it is important that supporters have confidence in our work and know that UUSC is a good investment for their support. We also know that you expect us to take risks and to push ourselves, understanding that dismantling systems of oppression requires deep self-examination and change. We are especially excited about our new campaign, Hope, Courage, Action, putting justice on the move. This is exactly what these times call for and what we are doing today. To our members and supporters, thank you. I hope tonight's celebration demonstrates the impact of your commitment and inspires you to spread the word and invite others to become part of the change and collective liberation we are building together. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope you enjoy the evening.
Happy 80th anniversary, UUSC. My name is Ned White, and I am honored to be chair of the board of the Service Committee. On behalf of the entire board, I warmly welcome all of you to this virtual festivity. It is also my honor to light our chalice today, symbol of the Service Committee since its origins helping refugees escape Nazi persecution in Europe in the 1930s and 40s. In lighting our chalice, we recollect 8 decades of defending and protecting people whose fundamental human rights are under threat. We recollect the courage that enabled our forebears in faith to risk their own personal safety for the benefit of others. We recollect the threats to liberty and life from governments and leaders desperate to secure and maintain power over others. And we acknowledge the persistence of these threats even unto our own precarious present. Living as I do on Roslyn Harbor, New York, the North Shore of Long Island, I'm aware that I also live in land once tended and inhabited by the Matinecock people, indigenous to this land long before most ancestors of the present inhabitants arrived. In lighting our chalice, we recollect our unpaid debt to these forebears and those who preceded you wherever you are living. I light our chalice in memory of those throughout human history whose rights have been denied or violated, in honor of those who stood up to defend and protect these rights, In recognition of our stated commitments to the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and to world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. In hopes that our ongoing work in partnership with those struggling to exercise their rights will bear fruit. And in expectation that the light, heat, and energy of this small flame will continue to inspire all of us to be wise, responsible, accountable allies in these struggles until fundamental human rights are recognized and protected throughout the world. So may it always be. Shalom, blessed be, Insha'Allah, Aho, Shanti, Amen.
It's really a thrill to see that the Service Committee is now celebrating its 80th. Wow. And it's still a vital force for a more just world. I was really proud to be director of the Service Committee from 72 to 98. And from the very beginning, I saw the work here as grounded in Unitarian Universalist values that champion human rights. In those years, we focused on women's empowerment and reproductive rights with local partners on 3 continents, and on war crimes against civilians in Central America, taking 30 members of Congress to see with their own eyes just what was happening there, and in the U.S. with problems of mass incarceration and child hunger. Well, today the Service Committee responds to the challenges of today, but it's still grounded in the values that were there at the start. So, adelante, salud, congratulations, UUSC.
Mary from Live and Learn and Kiribati Climate Action Network. We would like to congratulate and celebrate with UUSC on its 80th anniversary this year. We would like to thank you for your support for the last 4 years to a country so remote, isolated, vulnerable, and least visited in the world, Kiribati. You have reached and touched the lives of more than 200 communities in Kiribati and the Kiribati diaspora in New Zealand. And we would like to crown you with the Kiribati blessings, good health, peace, and prosperity for the next 80 years.
We are Atakapa Ishak Shawasha of the Grand Bayou Village of Louisiana. My name is Rosina Philippe, and with me today is my daughter, Ani, and my granddaughter, Mila. We, in our traditional way, celebrate and represent our traditional, intergenerational ways of learning and the importance of the unbroken chain of traditional ecological knowledge. We are honored to celebrate UUSC's 80th year. Congratulations to you all. UUSC, in partnership with the Lowlander Center, advocates and provides spaces for the voices of the indigenous and First Peoples of our lands, a place where our truths can be shared and told. So thank you for all that you do, and congratulations again, Unitarian Universalist Service Committee.
Hello, good day. Nemblami Henslin Boseto, and me come from Solomon Islands. Me work for Ecological Solutions Foundation. We are him one for la NGO. We are based lo Giza Western Province, lo Solomon Islands. Ecological Solutions Foundation. Him work along for a project with them UUSC for try for finding out what not impacts lo climate change, lo women and children, the elderly population, as well as people with disabilities. And so me work very closely with them, relevant ministries and stakeholders for finding out answers to some very important questions. And these questions are such as follows. What na some policies, the Solomon Islands, where him survey cover women and children, people with disabilities, as well as the elderly population in regards to climate change and the impacts of climate change. If there are some policies, we ask questions such as, are there any gaps? How can those policies be improved? We hope that these answers to the questions that are asked will provide us with a direction or a way forward to advocate for people with disabilities, women and children, as well as the elderly population in the Solomon Islands. Once again, thank you for listening, and thank you, Tomas. Bye-bye.
Bueno, este es un espacio donde están muchas de nuestras ancestras, como Berta Cáceres, Margarita Murillo, que fueron defensoras y que fueron asesinadas. El altar es una fuente de energía para nosotras y así vamos formando este espacio que mantiene encendida nuestra esperanza. Honduras es un país que históricamente ha tenido altos índices de violencia contra las mujeres.
Bueno, el Foro de Mujeres por la Vida es un espacio que trabaja por la defensa de los derechos humanos de las mujeres, pero que también establece un proceso de incidencia social y política para la denuncia.
UUSC answered the request of our partners in Honduras in 2018 in the wake of increased killings of human rights defenders.
Today, Foro de Mujeres is an example of the UUSC approach, identifying a need, building relationships rooted in trust, and collaborating on solutions that center those facing injustice. For the last 80 years, the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee has pushed back against oppression, racism, and injustice.
UUSC's work began in 1939 when Reverend Waitstill and Martha Sharp from Massachusetts took an extraordinary risk to help refugees who are escaping Nazi persecution in Europe.
In 1940, the Sharps established a charitable organization to formalize their bold humanitarian service. From Ethiopia to Nicaragua, Kentucky to Haiti, UUSC and its members have passionately mobilized for our collective liberation.
Our engagement with partners begins in the midst of crisis, responding to immediate and urgent need. Our strategy and our partners' work, though, is always designed to create systemic change. The heart of our work is a vision of human rights for all. We work with people who have lost the right to be in the place they've always called home, people who are facing arrest and violence for demanding their rights, people who are creating sustainable alternatives to violent and extractive economies and governments.
In places like Burma, UUSC supports a grassroots movement of Rohingya youth, demanding justice for those who have been killed and displaced by the Burmese military.
Today, Burma really represents UUSC's commitment to its values, and our engagements there on the Rohingya issue in particular kind of stem from the continuity of UUSC really working through its values.
In Nepal, UUSC supported a just recovery to the devastating 2015 earthquakes, working with women, indigenous people, and Dalits.
In crisis response situations, we are aiming to support groups that have been historically oppressed, who are more likely to see that oppression exacerbated in a post-crisis situation. They're also most likely to be left out of mainstream responses. Working with Native and Indigenous people in the U.S. and the Pacific, one of the things that we're hoping to do is shift the narrative around climate change and how the climate crisis is impacting First and Indigenous people particularly. And in that case, recently we supported the filing of a complaint with the UN Special Rapporteur on internally displaced people.
We are at a critical juncture in our history. UUSC and its members are bearing witness and taking action.
Desde el Foro de Mujeres por la Vida, la construcción de muros, especialmente en centros educativos como acá, es también transmitirles a las niñas y a esa generación de adolescentes que puedan recuperar su territorio cuerpo, que lo defiendan, que lo protejan, pero también mandar un mensaje al público que transita para que también vaya adquiriendo un nivel de conciencia, no solamente por respetar nuestro territorio cuerpo, sino también por cuidar y defender nuestro territorio tierra.
Bueno, nosotras pensamos o hemos hecho la reflexión que primero nuestra primera defensa es nuestro territorio cuerpo, así le llamamos que somos nosotras, nuestro derecho a decidir, a vivir una vida libre de violencia, pero ese territorio cuerpo está totalmente conectado al territorio tierra, ¿verdad? A nuestros ríos, a nuestras montañas, a nuestro país en general. Entonces, una cosa no se puede defender si no se defiende la otra. UUSC ha apoyado económicamente para que nosotras como organización podamos hacer cosas que a veces no tenemos las capacidades aquí. Pero también ha sido como un proceso de hermanamiento, de apoyo, ¿verdad? Ha sido muy importante, por ejemplo, que compañeras de UUSC vengan cuando pasan situaciones graves aquí en el país, que vengan el hermanamiento con la delegación, ¿verdad? Conocer los rostros, ver que tenemos una visión bastante similar y que es una relación de mucha confianza también.
It's a privilege to partner with communities around the world demanding their rights and building sustainable lives for their families. Your support year after year makes all of this possible. We have 80 years of vivid memories of struggle, hard work, loss, and triumph. Our hope, and most of all our commitment, are for a future filled with dignity, community, and collective liberation for all. Now I'm delighted to introduce our special guest. Samantha Power is the Anna Lend Professor of the Practice of Global Leadership and Public Policy at Harvard Kennedy School and the William D. Zabel Professor of Practice in Human Rights at Harvard Law School. Ambassador Power began her career as a journalist, reporting from places such as Bosnia, East Timor, Kosovo, Rwanda, Sudan, and Zimbabwe. Before joining the U.S. government, Power was the founding executive director of the Carr Center for Human Rights Policy at the Kennedy School. From 2013 to 2017, Ambassador Power served as the 28th U.S. Permanent Representative to the United Nations, as well as a member of President Obama's cabinet. From 2009 to 2013, Power served on the National Security Council as Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director for Multilateral Affairs and Human Rights, where she focused on issues including atrocity prevention, UN reform, LGBT and women's rights, the promotion of religious freedom and the protection of religious minorities, and the prevention of human trafficking. Her book, A Problem from Hell, America in the Age of Genocide, won the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Critics Circle Award in 2003. Power's most recent book, The Education of an Idealist, a memoir, was selected as one of the best books of 2019 by the New York Times, Washington Post, Economist, NPR, Time, Audible, Vanity Fair, and Christian Science Monitor. UUSC is grateful that Ambassador Power is offering us her time this evening to speak frankly about the successes and challenges of her career and the impact of moving from being an activist outsider to a government insider. Ambassador Power, thank you so much for being with us this evening.
Delighted.
To begin, in Education of an Idealist, you write of the importance of dignity as a historical force. At UUSC, our mission is to affirm the dignity and power of all people and advance human rights through partnerships with those most impacted by human rights abuses. So I'd like to ask, where do you see the force of dignity at play today, and what do you believe we could do to uplift it?
Well, I really applaud your network for always bringing forward this idea of nothing about you without you, just that intrinsic respect for people from other backgrounds, other cultures, other localities. I think that that's often missing at the highest levels of government. It tends to be a kind of one-size-fits-all solution, and I think we've ignored or looked past erosions in people's dignity at our peril. I think in America, for example, the economic costs of globalization, at least as they're broadly understood, the inequality that has grown, has left many, many people in our own country feeling as if life has passed them by or that their country is moving on without them. And sometimes there's a tendency, again, to talk in kind of macro terms where all things considered, this will be good for the mass and for the many, while losing sight on the one, on the individuals who don't see themselves in that progress story. So I'd put economics, I think, and equitable distribution of resources probably atop the list of the kinds of things that we need to be thinking about with dignity in mind. I think, when the United States goes forth in the world on behalf of a set of foreign policy objectives, it's really important to see the dignity and the particular national circumstance of the countries with which we're dealing. One of the things I did back when I was UN ambassador is go and visit each of the other 191 ambassadors to the UN at their missions, and it wasn't a big deal. It was all within New York. It wasn't like I was traveling to 191 countries with this sort of tour in mind. But just by showing up as America on their turf, paying a courtesy call to them, asking them, sort of what was the art on their walls? How did they become diplomats? What was their childhood like? What do they most miss about their countries? I can't tell you how shocked some of my interlocutors were, and about 50 of them had never been visited by a U.S. ambassador to the UN in the entire history of their country. And so I think that's just a reflection of, in a way, also the points you get when you show that kind of respect, especially if you're American or if you come from a very powerful country. And more of that is going to be needed as we seek to build really broad-based coalitions to deal with shared challenges.
I love the notion of bringing the concepts and the basic principles of organizing to the United Nations, and your stories about building those relationships were so powerful. I appreciate that. You've said before that you believe in robust support for the people and civil society activists. Can you share how you translated this value in your work as ambassador?
Sure. And again, to tell retrospective war stories, I think would not be the point, but more to look ahead and really think about how we can do more of this going forward. I had come from an activist background, from the background of yelling at the government from the outside, writing things to try to pressure government officials. And then I found myself in the room where it happens, as it were. And what I noticed was that there is a temptation once you have entered officialdom to think that somehow governments have a monopoly on wisdom or even just on information. And of course, you do get access to vast amounts of intelligence from all around the world, to the translations of different publications and so forth that are published. There are tremendous resources that come with being in government, but to make time in the week, in very busy weeks, notwithstanding national security crises, to meet with civil society actors, to meet with dissidents, to meet with people even in the private sector who have a sense of a country or a community's economic prospects, which is where, of course, a lot of suffering and pain can occur in the face of unemployment or joblessness. And just to always make time to recognize the value of those encounters as a kind of stress test for ideas that in governmental circles or at the UN sometimes get incubated in really closed silos, where it's just officialdom from one country talking to officialdom from another country. The other thing I tried to do to try to bring home the human consequences to our decision making was actually in Security Council meetings, have the people affected by the conflicts that we were making an effort to mitigate or to resolve, have the people affected speaking about what those conflicts or what those crises were doing in their communities. One example of this was during the Ebola crisis, not a conflict situation, but these 3 countries in West Africa that had come out of war circumstances were finally getting back on their feet, and then the Ebola pandemic hits. And, the world was doing its best, chipping in resources here and there, but the international community was sort of still in quite a passive, more recessive posture at that point, kind of hoping that the Ebola epidemic in West Africa would end in the way that prior Ebola epidemics had ended. And one of the things that I did was chair an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council to say, no, business as usual is not going to be enough. This is a profound threat to international peace and security. And I brought, of course, the head of the UN, the Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General, and the head of the World Health Organization to the meeting. But that wasn't going to move anybody. That was going to be statistics and doom and gloom and forecasts. But it was going to be fundamentally spoken from the perspective of people whose own families were not vulnerable. So using the new technologies that we're taking advantage of here, we actually beamed in a frontline Liberian health worker who talked to the packed gallery in the UN Security Council chamber about what it was like to have to turn families away who came, quite literally in some cases, carrying their child, looking for Ebola care, and to be a Liberian who cared passionately about trying to help that family and having to turn them away, and seeing fathers and mothers, getting back into their cars or into a taxi cab and going back to their homes, having carried a child, knowing not only that the child was not going to make it if there was not a bed available, which there were not at that time, but also that the parent was going to go home and infect everybody else because they had been carrying the child, and it was such an infectious disease. And so when he spoke, you could just hear a pin drop. And you think to yourself, if these voices were more present in summoning the attention of diplomats and getting them to put their talking points aside, their habits that have grown up over many years or many decades even, and just listen to what the stakes are. I think all it bred in that instance was more urgency, so much more creativity, and just a kind of personal stake.
At UUSC, one of our commitments is to trying to amplify the voices of our partners, the civil society organizations, the grassroots groups that are on the ground and experiencing the conditions, including providing support for Indigenous leaders to participate in the Conference of Partners each year to talk about the climate crisis and how it's affecting them. In our relationships with Indigenous communities in the United States, we are working to support them in being recognized and take their rightful place in decisions affecting their lives as they face displacement because of the climate crisis. And some of the tribes that we're in relationship with have written a formal complaint to the United Nations Special Rapporteur of Human Rights of Internally Displaced People. So I'd be curious of your thoughts on how we can ensure that the United Nations plays a role in advancing international cooperation to address the climate crisis and also the crisis facing people who are already being displaced.
Well, just to start by saying there are 80 million people displaced today, more than at any other time since World War II. So anything that you and your network and your community can do to be supportive of those who either have been displaced or who are facing displacement, is incredibly important. I think that looking to the United Nations is important for a couple reasons. I mean, first, this is a problem that is striking so many parts of the earth, and it's only through a global organization that we can coordinate the kinds of responses we need to prevent displacement in the first place, right? To actually address the root causes, which means putting far more pressure on nations, on fossil fuel companies, and on citizens, frankly, on ourselves, to be taking more steps to ensure that the kind of displacement that is forecast, which goes well beyond even what we're experiencing today, that those horrible worst-case scenarios do not come to pass. And so that's an important sort of venue within the UN that is going to become ever more important. But the part you're talking about, really, I think you can already see the UN and the international instruments that have existed for many decades kind of doing their work. I mean, there are some communities, particularly indigenous communities, whether here in the United States or in a country like Brazil, who don't feel like their governments are seeing them, respecting their rights, respecting their value, respecting their tradition. And it is really helpful already to have these UN instruments out there as the standards to which these communities can appeal. Now, we face a challenge in the United States that many Western democracies do not face, which is that the issue of the UN's standing is very divisive. And to keep going in that channel is really, really important and can make a difference. You could hear the UN's voice being exercised on behalf of these communities that find themselves so vulnerable. That's important. But so is making the plight of these communities relevant in our own domestic politics. And that's the kind of perfect storm, as it were, not to use a climate metaphor, but that one would be looking for is the two-step. For those who don't respect what the UN Special Rapporteur says, here's a human interest tale of how communities that have lived here for centuries are being ravaged by emissions that they have very little part in themselves producing. Tell that story, make sure those voices are amplified, ensure that those politicians and public officials who are sympathetic to their plight create platforms in Washington and in state capitals all across the country to tell their stories. So I think that twofer, that appeal to the international, where those standards again have force, and the need to vernacularize the issue so that it also has resonance in our local communities.
During the Obama administration, you served during the president's visit to Burma, the first U.S. president to visit there, which marked a historic step in the United States' engagement with the country. The symbolism of this visit for the international community was a critical moment for furthering the protection of human rights. Given the state of human rights in Burma today, would you say that this visit was too soon during the military transition? What do you feel about how it went? What do you wish you had known then that would have informed how you advised the president on the visit at the time?
It's a great and very fair question. Having been on that visit, it was an unbelievable experience to see a sitting American president visit Burma for the first time. You all have been there working in the trenches with people who had such difficulty, speaking their minds, writing what they felt, even traveling over so many years.
Even having the right to stay in their homes.
Exactly. People suffering displacement, whether by virtue of military conflict or political targeting. I mean, it had been a long road, even to the point that it looked like Burma was getting to, in, let's say, 2011, 2012, having elections where non-traditional, let's say non-military candidates were able to run and indeed even to win. And so having President Obama visit, I think, was an effort to try to accelerate a process that was already underway, that process of transition from military rule to political rule. I honestly, Mary Catherine, I think I would do it again. I think that even though we had a big debate within the government about whether it was too soon, I would do it again for a couple reasons. One, the visit itself became leverage in order to try to get more political prisoners out of jail, in effect tying the visit to securing further concessions from the military regime at the time. The visit became a means of staging a very large public gathering at a local university where people hadn't gathered in decades, basically because of the crackdown and the denial of freedom of association. So even just seeing young people experience what it was like, the sort of power in gathering in large numbers, having President Obama talk about the Rohingya and events in Rakhine State at that level, knowing how much animus there is across the society, how much suspicion. And this is, of course, well before the genocide against the Rohingya. And so I think the visit itself, even just as a transactional matter, produced a set of concessions that were important at the time. I think the question that I struggle with and think I would not, where an issue that I would not do the same all over again, is that toward the end of President Obama's time in office, we made the judgment that, in keeping still a set of sanctions in place on the government in Myanmar, that we were sort of half pregnant, as it were, and I hate using gendered metaphors like that, but but that is that we were trying to allow the people of Burma to enjoy the fruits of liberalization and opening up. But by keeping these sanctions in place, we were deterring businesses and tourists and others from, coming into Burma and really getting to meet the people and to explore the country and so forth. And so President Obama made the judgment that we should sort of lift, in effect, all of the sanctions and bet on Burma's political transition. And I think there was far too much reliance in that calculus on one person, on Aung San Suu Kyi and her status within Burmese society, but also her willingness to apply the human rights principles that she had championed for so long across the board, regardless of religion or ethnicity. And that was a gamble. I think it was a reasonable gamble to take at the time. But I don't think, looking back, that we can say that gamble has been, that it has paid off, insofar as we gave up some critical leverage before Burma had taken the steps that we were hoping they would take, even as it relates to Aung San Suu Kyi and her own ability to campaign, or anybody's ability to campaign. But she does continue to have, of course, this incredibly prominent and important leadership role. Really is in some ways the de facto symbolic leader of the country, if not the titular leader. And of course, she doesn't have control of the military or anything like that. But it's been very disappointing to see somebody whose judgment we also were relying on in that debate over how quickly to lift the sanctions, not raise her voice, even recognizing the difficult political circumstances that she's in. But for her to appear in the International Court of Justice defending the Myanmar military, after the crimes that it has committed against the Rohingya people, is just, sort of crushing to people who had put their hopes in her. And so I think, Mary Catherine, that would be, when I look back, I would say, to keep that leverage, for longer, to be able to continue on the path that we had been on, which is to meet every sort of step in liberalization that they took with a reward, not only from the US, but coordinated also with other countries. I think that, rather than, plunging in the way that we did, and sort of just taking that big gamble, I think that measure for measured approach would have been more fitting the circumstances at the time, at least in retrospect.
Do you believe that the United States can credibly advance human rights after how the U.S. administration has behaved over the past several years?
It's a lot harder, honestly. I mean, one of the things that U.S. officials in prior administrations, Republican and Democrat, used to do is complain when, foreign leaders were attacking the media. Now our own president calls the media the enemies of the people. We're a country, not only our government, but also our civil society organizations like the Carter Center monitor elections to make sure that they're free and fair. Part of the metrics, and I think you all have probably been involved in some election monitoring over the years as well, but among the metrics, would be looking at voter suppression, disenfranchisement, the stoking of violence, commitments by political leaders to peacefully transfer power. It's awkward, to say the least, now to bring those criteria to bear internationally when we have not only the president but also officials around him kind of embracing some of these tactics. And so I think there's going to be a long road to recovering America's legitimate voice on human rights again. And we all know that all American presidents have been sort of selective on human rights up to a point, but we've never quite seen it like this, particularly with the embrace of leaders who've ordered journalists executed or who've built camps, to detain more than 1 million Uyghurs in the case of President Trump, encouraging President Xi in that regard. So it's going to take us some time to get our credibility back. But I think in the end, if you look back at history, the U.S.'s human rights credibility has come much more, even prior to this administration, from the actions of organizations like yours, faith groups like yours, civil society actors, protest movements like the Me Too movement or the Black Lives Matter protest. I mean, what has really inspired people around the world, and where there's been a real contagion over time, is the kind of bottom-up efforts that have been made in this country when we slip to reclaim our principles. And when a leader departs, so egregiously from the kind of founding principles of the nation, to hold that leader account and to mobilize. And irrespective of the results of the presidential election, we've already seen that kind of bottom-up ferment here, and the world has seen it. They've seen the fact that now 42 out of America's 50 largest cities have changed their regulations in order to try to deter police violence against civilians, but against African Americans in particular. They've seen more women running for office and winning office in 2018 in the midterm elections than ever before in U.S. history. And they've seen young people in America leading the movement to prevent gun violence, leading the climate movement, which has really elevated the need to prevent climate change to atop the political agenda, which is the first time that's ever happened in American politics. It's too late. It should have happened sooner, of course, and we know we're racing against the clock, but it may not have happened at all if not for young people recognizing that it's their planet that is being potentially irrevocably harmed by the decision-making of leaders today. So I think that those dimensions of quote-unquote U.S. leadership will also have bearing on the credibility of America's word on human rights. And it's why the kind of citizen partnerships that you all have been a part of fostering and growing over so many years become a really important part of communicating that we're not just the sum of what one leader does, but it's citizen diplomacy that I think is happening every day.
Well, you've pronounced yourself an idealist, and you've shared some stories about your experience of what's real and practical in government and in your official role. So I wonder if we might close by hearing a little bit, and I think you were foreshadowing it just now, but a little bit more about where you find hope right now.
Well, I think that we have a sort of interesting kind of pair of dueling trends happening around the world right now. I mean, the first is, and we can't avoid the fact that there is a human rights recession underway, particularly as it relates to civil and political rights. And that has been exacerbated by the COVID pandemic. And of course, there's a real risk that it'll be exacerbated further by the economic fallout that is likely to last a very long time, and the economic devastation on individuals and communities caused by the pandemic. So that freedom recession, human rights recession, is going on now close to 14 years of freedom setbacks outpacing gains in civil and political rights enjoyment around the world. At the same time, you're seeing more citizen activation happening in more places around the world in the last 2 years than in any time in recorded history. And that includes citizens coming together, in the best cases, practicing social distancing, but in the middle of a pandemic, continuing those trends, finding ways to bang pots and pans from their balconies as a form of protest, if not to go out on the street, where social distancing may be harder. And so I think there's something in these protests from Armenia, where a very kleptocratic government was brought down, to Chile, where corruption and a sense that elites were not passing on the economic gains of the country, to ordinary people, to Sudan, a country where I worked and traveled, where you had a leader who'd been in power for 3 decades, who'd been indicted by The Hague for genocide. And honestly, if you'd asked me, I would just not have thought. He just seemed completely entrenched. And it wasn't just that protesters came out. They came out during the Arab Spring. It didn't work. They came out after the Arab Spring in Sudan. It didn't work. And they just kept coming out. But it was also that estimates are that about 2/3 of those protesters were women. And in that kind of patriarchal culture, for those women to take that kind of risk and now continue to put pressure on a civilian government now that Bashir is in jail, the dictator, the indicted dictator is in jail, and you have a civilian transition underway, but those women haven't gone away. Those protesters haven't gone away. They're now holding their friends and colleagues from behind the barricades now to account. And those are just a few examples, again, sort of obscure, maybe not so prominent here in the headlines, but mirrored by what we see in our communities in terms of voter registration drives, protesting, and so forth. So I think the best measure of who's going to win in terms of these dueling trends is whether that kind of citizen engagement can be sustained. Because there are a lot of people really writing the obituary for democracy right now. And it's incredibly heartening to me to see how many people haven't gotten the memo, that they recognize that democracy is more than some top-down fiat or some abrogation of norms, that we thought were going to bind behavior. Leaders will do what leaders do. It's what is the response from the rest of us, that's going to count in the long term.
Thank you so much for your inspiration and for your hope and for the stories that you've shared. We're so glad to be able to offer this on our 80th anniversary as we are telling our own stories of hope and reflecting exactly what you described about the power of people coming together and partnering for human rights and speaking out and showing up. And that's what we're going to keep doing for the next 80 years. Thank you for helping us celebrate, and we appreciate your time very much.
I'm genuinely honored to be part of your celebration. I commend you for all the incredible work you do with dignity at its core. Thank you.
Thank you. Tonight, we have the honor of featuring the beautiful work of Colombian artist Zuma Pataroyo. You'll see the beginning stages of an art installation she is creating, inspired by the work of UUSC. Please stay with us to the end to see the art revealed.
Mi nombre es Gabriela Sorto, soy hija de Porfirio Sorto, un defensor preso político en estos momentos en Olanchito Lloro, aquí en Honduras. Pues nuestra lucha ha venido a raíz de que ensuciaron nuestro río Guapinol, nuestro río San Pedro, los ríos que nos rodean pues alrededor de nuestra comunidad. Y nuestra lucha ha sido siempre pacífica por la defensa de nuestro río, por la defensa de nuestros recursos naturales, de nuestra comunidad. A raíz de nuestra lucha ha venido la criminalización, el hostigamiento por parte de los militares, de los policías, por parte del Estado de Honduras. A raíz de eso hay 8 compañeros presos en Olanchito en estos momentos, ya más de un año de estar encarcelados injustamente. Pues su única lucha ha sido defender los ríos Guapinol, los ríos San Pedro y todos los ríos que nos rodean. Agradecida pues con todas las ayudas internacionales, las ayudas nacionales que han venido a nuestra lucha, pues sabemos que nuestra lucha ha sido justa y sigue siendo justa, y sabemos que todo esto pues ha traído represión y criminalización, hostigamiento en las comunidades, aquí en la comunidad de Guapinol y alrededor de muchas comunidades. Pues nosotros lo único que hemos hecho como defensores ha sido defender nuestros recursos naturales, y una lucha pues para defender lo que nos va a quedar el día de mañana. Pues sabemos que si defendemos el agua, defendemos la vida, y que a raíz de esto pues viene toda la criminalización que nos ha venido. Pero agradecer a todas estas organizaciones internacionales, al Comité Unitario Universalista, pues felicitándolo por sus 80 años de aniversario, y agradecida pues como defensora por promover los derechos humanos y la justicia social a nivel pues de todo el mundo, porque sabemos que estamos defendiendo nuestros recursos naturales. Gracias.
Soy Juana Esquivel, trabajo con la Fundación San Alonso Rodríguez. Nosotros trabajamos en la región norte de Honduras, trabajamos con familias campesinas, garífunas, mestizas e indígenas en la lucha por la tierra, por la defensa de los bienes naturales y la justicia social en el campo. Actualmente recibimos el apoyo del Comité de Servicio Unitario Universalista para acompañar las familias que han sido afectadas por la emergencia del COVID-19. estamos apoyando con asistencia humanitaria durante la emergencia y también al restablecimiento de sus medios productivos y medios de vida para garantizar la seguridad alimentaria. En esta ocasión queremos enviarle un saludo y nuestro agradecimiento por ese compromiso mostrado con la justicia social y los derechos humanos en Honduras.
Hello, my name is Uchechku Onwa. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm currently based in New York City. I work as a co-director at Queer Detainee Empowerment Project, and I'm also the coordinator of Community Organizing Program. QDEP supports LGBTQI plus gender non-conforming and HIV plus immigrants that are currently in immigration detention, those recently released from detention, or those that are at risk of being detained or being deported, in securing structural health and wellness, educational, emotional, and legal support. We also organize around structural and state violence that LGBTQI plus gender non-conforming and undocumented immigrants face in relation to their HIV status, race, immigration status, gender identity, and expression. We thank the UUSC because with their support we've been able to launch leadership development program last year for transgender women, cisgender queer women, and gender non-conforming people to these communities that are mostly underrepresented, are not being centered in the movement, to give them the tools that would allow them to organize and also become leader within their community to challenge every systemic oppression. And also with their continuous support, we were able to start with the second cohort session of this program. Also, with the support from UUSC, we've been able to provide mental health therapy for our members that experience detention, and also those that have lost their job and due to the impact of COVID-19. We thank you, UUSC, for their continuous support within our organization. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Now for a special treat. I'm excited to introduce this talented ensemble from Sarasota, Florida, the West Coast Black Theater Troupe.
Hello, UUSC staff and supporters. I'm Nate Jacobs, founder and artistic director of West Coast Black Theater Troupe. On behalf of Julie Leach, our executive director, and her husband, Brock, we'd like to thank you for partnering with people all over the world who are struggling for their rights, their dignity, and their power. We have put together a small performance for you to uplift you in your challenging work and to continue to keep you lighting up the world.
Light up the night, get ready. We're gonna sing all the sorrows away. We're gonna light up the night, get ready. We're gonna dance into a new day. We're gonna take you to a place where music flows. We're gonna take control, singing songs that we all know. We'll light your hearts aglow. We're gonna fill your soul as we light up the night. Light up the night. Light up the night. Light up, light up, light up the night.
I hope you enjoyed that. Light up the night. Continue to light up the world. There's another song that we want to share with you that talks about the time that we're all in. The song is called Don't Let This Cold, Cold World Get You Down. So we're all in this together, right? This pandemic. And what it has reminded all of us is that what happens to the least of us affects all of us. So I hope these words inspire you and give you hope. When the whole world seems against you, your whole life seems unborn, and all you ever wanted was a little peace. I can understand just how you feel.
your sleep. Well, here's some advice that I think you should keep. So we're telling you, don't let this cold world get you down. No, 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 no. Don't let this cold world get you down, 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 down. Don't let this cold, cold world get you down, get you down. Don't you let cold, cold, the cold world get you down. Dry your eyes, don't cry no more. What in the world do you think that a friend is for? There is always something that we can do, yeah, me and you. Oh, oh, oh. So if things don't go your way, you gotta hold on, my friend, to another day. For the things that life will put you through, I'm telling you, better listen to me. Yeah. Don't let this cold world get you down. No, don't you let it hold on. Don't let this cold world get you down, down, down. Don't let this cold, cold world get you down, cold, cold world. You got a friend, get you down. You got a friend, yes you do. Cold, cold world. You can lean on me, get you down. I can lean on you. Cold, cold world, cold world, get you down. Whatever happened to that happy song that we once knew? Don't you ever let it bother you and take your hope away. Cold, cold world, get you down. Don't you let it, cold, cold world, get you down. You're gonna make it. We're gonna make it. Cold world, get you down, down, down. Don't let this cold world get you
Hola, soy Guillermo de la Rosa, vivo en Houston, Texas y soy miembro y líder de la organización Livinghood Wheelchair Association, una organización que ayuda a la comunidad inmigrante con discapacidad. Proveemos supplies y equipo médico, abogamos por la equidad de las personas con discapacidad y visitamos al hospital a personas que se han accidentado para darles información y hacerles saber que no están solos. Desde el 2017 hemos colaborado con UUSC. Después del huracán Harvey, dimos ayuda financiera y también escribimos un estudio de las necesidades de la comunidad inmigrante que está con discapacidad. Con la ayuda del investigador Leonardo Valenzuela, pudimos poner los datos que colectamos en un contexto más amplio. Con ese reporte pudimos tener claras las necesidades de la comunidad. También hemos colaborado en nuestro programa de Disaster Justice. Con esta colaboración hemos podido hacer planes para preparar diferentes tipos de desastres, incluyendo inundaciones, explosiones químicas y COVID-19. También hemos podido ayudar y colaborar con otros grupos para diseñar planes para la continuidad del programa CUP. Gracias a UUSC por la colaboración con Livinghood.
I'm Alicia Wallace from Equality Bahamas, which promotes women's rights as human rights, and we really focus on the most vulnerable people in our communities, which includes women and girls, people who are experiencing poverty, migrant people, and LGBTQ people. Over the past year, we've been really focused on climate change and focusing on climate action and what we need to do to move forward. We've been about a year now since Hurricane Dorian which displaced thousands of people from Abaco and Grand Bahama, which were directly hit by that Category 5 storm. And we did direct hurricane relief for about 6 months, providing food, hygiene kits, clothing, and some other items. And when we realized that was coming to a close, we really wanted to do more work. And we connected with UUSC, which has been a huge support in our developing a research protocol, as well as putting together an innovation lab and welcoming the people who were impacted from the storm to come together to talk about some of the challenges that they faced, showing them how to frame problems, as well as the ideation process, the entire innovation process, and equipping them with the skills and kind of pulling out of that some of the solutions that are coming directly from the people who were most impacted, to show the government as well as NGOs that the people who are the most impacted are the people who actually hold the solutions. And we need to make more space for them and actually advocate on their behalf so that they can receive these resources and be a part of solving the problems, because they're the ones who are living with the challenges, and they are the ones who should be able to have the most voice in how we move forward.
I had the privilege of serving as president of the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee from 2010 to 2016, following 12 years as executive director of Amnesty International USA, and prior to that, the presidency of the Unitarian Universalist Association. I was enormously proud of all that we accomplished during my years at UUSC, but indeed proud of the history of the organization itself, 80 years of making significant change in the world. During the 6 years I was there, just to give you a few examples, we partnered with 80 imams in Sudan to rescue young girls from female genital mutilation. We won back something like $600,000 in stolen wages, back wages for poultry workers in Arkansas. We convinced one of the largest mining corporations in the world to stop polluting the water of Mayan Indians in Guatemala. We launched the UU College of Social Justice. We created credit unions in Myanmar, Burma, one of the most repressive countries in the world. We established a community school and 6 eco-villages in Haiti following the devastating earthquake there, and so much more. I'm enormously proud of my association with UUSC, but most importantly, I'm grateful to you for all that you have done to make this organization the thriving, effective agent for change that it is. I have enormous confidence in the leadership of Mary Catherine Moore, and even more, I have enormous faith in you, in your willingness to give of yourselves, of your time, of your largesse, of your treasure, and of your wisdom to make sure that UUSC's next 80 years are as effective as its last. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight and helping us celebrate UUSC's 80th anniversary. I hope you enjoyed hearing from our partners as much as we did, and I hope maybe you learned a little bit more about our work. We look forward to working with you over the next 80 years to carry forward our work advancing human rights in the world. Please join us. You may support us financially if you are moved to do so by following the directions at the bottom of the screen or by finding our donate button on our webpage at uusc.org. Please join us.
Hello, I am Reverend Jacqueline Brett, a member of the Board of Trustees of UUSC and a minister at the Eno River Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Durham, North Carolina. May this time of celebration and appreciation of our 80 years of collective work together lead us across a new threshold that beckons us forward with renewed clarity and vision for the challenges of these times and the times to come. May our convictions remain sure and ever grounded by a spirit of love. May our hearts be infused with courage. May the work of our hands be the fuel of our active and determined hope. And may we never grow weary in our commitment to freedom, justice, and liberation for all. Go in peace, go in love, and may your life be a blessing. Amen and Ashe.